Hey everybody, this is Russ from Retro Game Core. One of the most frequent questions I get are how to sync save files between one device and another. And I have to admit that I've been putting off this video for years because it is a very complicated subject. Well, today is the day. We're going to set up SyncThing on 5 different platforms, including just a Windows PC, but then also 4 different handhelds that are each running a different operating system. In addition, I've been working on a written guide for quite some time now that will walk you through the process of all the other handhelds you can think of. And once you have this set up, it can be pretty awesome. You can play a game on one device, then turn it off, and then start up another device and play that exact same game exactly where you were just a couple seconds later. However, bear in mind that this is not a super simple process, and the more handhelds and operating systems you introduce to your whole SyncThing platform, it is going to get even more complicated from there. However, I'm going to do my very best just to make sure this is the most simple and fun way that you can do it. And so grab a snack and drink and let's go ahead and get started. Okay, before we jump into the guide itself, let's talk a little bit about what you're getting yourself into if you want to set up SyncThing. And first thing, let's talk about what SyncThing really is. And essentially, this is a peer-to-peer synchronization platform. In other words, you'll be syncing up your files from one device to the other, as opposed to using cloud storage. And so this is different than cloud saves. Cloud saves are when you store something like on Dropbox or Google Drive, and then access them from various devices. That is also possible, but not what we're covering here today. Instead, we're going to be sharing files from one device to the other, which is a lot faster. Now, to facilitate this whole thing, I do recommend using a PC as your host machine. And you can use either a Windows, Mac, or Linux PC, they are all supported. So the idea is that your computer is going to be home base. All the devices will connect to that and then sync files from one another. But also in this video, I'll show you how to sync directly from one device to the other in case you don't want to use your PC as a middleman. Now, syncing files between SyncThing can get very complicated, and so we're also going to try to keep this as simple as possible. And so in this video, we're only going to focus on 2 different file types, and they're both going to be coming directly from RetroArch. And that's going to be our save files as well as our save states. Now, you can also set this up with other emulators, for example, like the PSP emulator or any other standalone emulator. We're not going to get that deep into the weeds with this video. Instead, we are only going to focus on RetroArch and those saves and states, which means it's going to be mostly focused on retro gaming, you know, NES, Super Nintendo, stuff like that. But in this video, we will go over all the basic building blocks in getting this set up. So afterwards, if you want to try this with a standalone emulator, you will know exactly what to do. Another thing to keep in mind is that when using RetroArch save files and save states, when RetroArch saves these games, it's going to save them by the name of the file itself. And so that means between your various different handhelds, they need to have games that have the same file names as well. And so if you own a bunch of different devices and they all have different ROMs on them, say for example, you're still using the games that came with your device, this is not going to work out very well because chances are those games are not going to be named in the same way. And that means that it's in your best interest to standardize your ROM library. For example, I have a USB solid state drive, and this is where I put all my ROM files on. I have folders for each of my systems, and then I have my own collection of games. And then every time I get a new device or flash a new operating system, I put those same games exactly in the same folder. That means that the same version of Mario 3 that I'm playing on my TrimUI Smart Pro is the same one that I'm playing on my RG35XX. And so that'll go a long way when it comes to synchronizing all your files as well. And finally, one more time before we jump in, I just want to remind you that there is a full written guide in the video description. It's kind of a work in progress because every time there's a new operating system or new update, I have to go in and kind of figure out how it all works with SyncThing, and so there will be different chapters within there. And so if I don't feature your favorite operating system or handheld in this video, you will have the written guide down below. So let's dive in and talk about the 4 handhelds that we're going to be syncing up with our Windows PC. And these are all pretty standard handhelds, but the main point here is that they're all using different operating systems. For example, if you have an Android-based device, we will be covering the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro, and it'll apply to any other Android-based handheld. Similarly, we're going to cover MuOS on the RG35XXH, and any other device that runs on MuOS will also be set up in the same way. Same thing with handhelds that are running either Rocknix or its older version called Jealous. That's why we're going to use the Powkiddy RGB30 as well. And then finally, just because I really wanted to set this up on my TrimUI Smart Pro, we're also going to use CrossMix OS, although that only works with this one handheld. Either way, these are the 4 handhelds that we have in this video, and then I will cover others in the written guide, and I will continue to update that as well. However, before we start setting up syncing with each of our handhelds, we need to build a host machine first. And to do that, we're just going to use a standard Windows PC, but you can also use a Mac or a Linux-based one as well. So we're going to start at the very beginning here, and that is that we're going to install RetroArch on that host machine just in case you don't have it installed installed already. And the idea here is that we don't necessarily have to play our games on this Windows PC, but by installing RetroArch on it, we will have all the folders we need for the syncing. So if you don't already have it installed on the computer that you'll be using as your host machine, then go to retroarch.com and then download the latest version for your platform. On the downloads page, it should automatically detect what operating system you're using, and then you can just choose to download either the nightly or the stable version. Either one will work fine, but I like to live on the edge, so I'm going to grab the nightly version. Now, once we have the file downloaded, I'm going to double click on it to start the installation. And you might get a Windows error like this. Just click on the More Info link, and then down on the bottom, you'll see the Run Anyway button. Click on that one. After that, you can just run through the installation process so that you have RetroArch installed on your machine. From there, we're just going to open up RetroArch one time to build all of our folders. And thankfully, during the installation, it made a desktop shortcut, so this should be super easy on Windows. And while we're here in RetroArch, let's go over the recommended save standards. And so this will be the example you'll want to apply with all the other versions of RetroArch on your other handhelds. Now, even though in this video we are going to set up both saves and save states, I do want to give one word of caution before we get into it, in that save states can get really complicated and it's a little bit risky as well. In general, it is always better to use in-game saves or save files because they're going to be a lot more stable, they're going to work across a bunch of different emulator options. But then also save states can be a little bit volatile in that they will often overwrite one over the other. And it can get a little bit more risky if you use auto save states and auto loads, just because those will also overwrite things automatically, and each operating system behaves a little bit differently. We're going to do our best to standardize that and talk about the best way to set up your saves for all of this, but just bear in mind that the best way that you can set this up is to just use save files, not save states. To start, open up RetroArch without any game running, and then go into Settings, and then go down to Saving. Here we want to make sure that the first two options are turned on. These are the ones that say sort your saves and save states by the core name. And that's because most of the OS options that we have on handhelds have this same setting turned on too, so we want to make this standard. If you're within RetroArch on your device and you see any other options below, like saving it into a content directory turned on, make sure you turn those off. And same thing down here, if it says to write the saves into the content directory, you also want to have this off as well. And this is all to ensure that your save files and save states are going into the correct RetroArch folder. Now, if you are going to do save states, then there's also an option to auto-save and then auto-load your states. This is super convenient if you're only going to be using one handheld, but if you're going to be syncing among many, then this can get fairly complicated. And so I would only recommend turning this on your various handhelds if you're okay with having to manage your save states in case one gets overwritten. Another failsafe that you can turn on to make sure that you don't completely overwrite your save states is to turn on incremental save states. This means that every time you save a new save state, it's going to give it a 1-up number. That way, instead of overwriting the previous one, you just have a second one added. So if you are going to turn on auto-save and auto-load, I'd recommend turning on increment save states, and then below that, under the maximum auto-increment save states to keep, I recommend setting this to 10. This means that every time you make a save state, it's going to save them as a 1-up all the way up to the number 10, and then it'll go back to number 1. And this will be handy because if you accidentally overwrite one of your save states, you can just go back to the previous one. And it also gives you 10 chances to go back. Long story short, when using autosave and autoload with SyncThing, it can get wonky from time to time, so these are the failsafes that I recommend using. Anyway, that's about it when it comes to that initial setup of RetroArch. There may be other things you have to do depending on the device that you're using, but for now, that's just kind of your blank standard. So now let's close out of RetroArch and check out where our saves and states are actually going to be saved on our machine. So if we open up our computer and then go into the C drive, you should see now a RetroArch-Win64 folder. And within here, there are two folders that we're going to use for all of our syncing. The first one is called Saves. This is going to be our save files directly from the game. And then the other one will be called States. That's going to be our save states that we capture here and there. So these two folders are going to be our home base. Basically, every single handheld is going to be syncing with these two, putting all of their save files here. They're all going to be hosted on the computer and then pushed out to other devices. And so now that we've created these folders and identified their location, we are ready to install SyncThing. And thankfully, the installation process here on Windows is super easy. There's going to be a GitHub page. You'll just go down to the Releases tab, and then from there, just go to the latest release and download the exe file. After that, go to wherever you saved that file and then open it up. You will likely get another one of these Windows Protected Your PC prompts. Just click on the More Info. And then of course you'll see that Run Anyway button, which will ask you, do you really want to do this? And you're going to click on, yeah man, I want to do it. Now based on the security settings of your computer, you might get an error like this that says that it can't install it. And if you do, this is actually a pretty easy fix. You just need to go into Settings and then go into Windows Security. From there, on the bottom, you'll see a tab that says Protection History, and that's going to show you the history of the fact that it didn't allow you to install SyncThing. From there on the right, there's going to be a little Actions drop-down menu. Click on the one that says Allow on Device. After that, it's going to whitelist this application so that you can install it. So let's go back into our Downloads folder, double-click on that file, and now we should be able to install SyncThing. It's going to ask, do we want to install for the current user or for all users? I would recommend for all users. From there, just go through all of these standard prompts. You don't need to change anything, so just keep on clicking on Next. After that, you'll get to a section that says Select Additional Tasks, and these are going to be checked by default. The first is going to start SyncThing with your machine, which is going to be really handy. And then after that, it's going to give you the option to start SyncThing as soon as we're done with the installation. We're also going to leave this checked. From there, click Next. It'll finish the installation, and then it'll give you the option to open SyncThing configuration page. We're going to do that as well. And so after we click on Finish, it's going to open up our web browser because all of SyncThing works through your browser UI. When you first start it up, you'll probably get some sort of warning about the connection not being private. It really feels like Windows doesn't want you to install this thing, but it is super handy. Anyway, click on the Advanced button. It'll give you an option to proceed to the IP address. Just click on that. The first time you start it up, it's going to ask whether or not you want to do any sort of usage reporting. I'm just going to select no. And after that, here we are. If you ever need to get back to this page, the easiest thing to do is to go to this IP address right here. It's going to be 127.0.0.1, and then you'll have a colon and then the indication of a port, and this is going to be port 8384. And that's all you really have to do to get back to this interface. Type in the IP address and then that port. So now let's get started with setting up SyncThing. And one thing you may notice right now and further on in the video is that you'll get a lot of prompts to set up a username and password. And this obviously is to help lock down and secure all the files that you'll be syncing on your home network. However, I don't recommend setting up any additional security settings, and that's for two reasons. The first is that we're not talking about any sort of sensitive files like your favorite cat photos or any sort of banking information. We're really just talking about save files for retro games, and so I don't really expect hackers to be interested in that. The second thing to bear in mind is that SyncThing is just inherently secure on its own, and that's because all these files are just existing within your home network. And so in order for anybody to be able to access these files, they have to get onto your home network first. And so that does make it somewhat more secure than actually sharing files to the cloud, which are going over the internet. Either way, you will see a bunch of security prompts as you set all this kind of stuff up, and I would just recommend ignoring them unless you are very security conscious. So with all that out of the way, let's actually now set up the folders that we want to sync via SyncThing. And if you remember, there were two folders, one called Saves and one called States within our RetroArch folder. So here, back on the web UI for our host PC, we're going to click on the button up near the center that says Add Folder. This will give us a pop-up menu where we're going to add a couple things that are really important. The first thing is we need to type in the folder label. You can name this whatever you would like. I'm just going to call mine RA-save. Below that will be a folder ID. You don't want to touch this one at all. That's going to be a unique identifier for this folder. Below that is going to be the folder path. This is where we're going to point to the saves folder within RetroArch. And this is a great opportunity to show off one of my favorite features within SyncThing. And that is that it'll show you your folder paths as you type them out. So in going back to our RetroArch folder, you can see that it's located within C, then RetroArch, and then Saves folder. But if we go into the folder path and we type in C, colon, and then backslash, on the right side, you'll see a list of all the folders within your C directory. And if we start typing in the next one, which is going to be that RetroArch folder, you'll see that it'll narrow down those options. And so here's that RetroArch folder, and all we have to do is click on it, and it's going to fill the rest in. From there, we can type in backslash again, and now it's going to show us the contents of the RetroArch folder. And this time, all we have to do is type in the word saves. And again, it's going to narrow it down by the letter S, and then A, and then here we are. We now have that saves directory. And so I found this to be a really handy trick when it actually comes to navigating through your file system. And this is the trick that we'll use for the rest of the video. However, on Windows, there's also an easy way to get this path. All you'd have to do is go back to the folder that you want to sync and then right-click on it and then select Copy as Path. Now, if we go back into that folder path section, we can just hit Control V to paste it. And just like that, we're going to get the entire path, but bear in mind, you'll have to remove those quotation marks first. Either way, those are two different ways that you can add in the path of the folder that we want to sync with. Now that we have that set as our folder path, we want to go into the third tab, which is called File Versioning. By default, this will be turned off, but we want to turn on Simple File Versioning. What this means is that every time that you update one of your files within the synced folder, the host PC is going to keep an older version of it. And this is handy because it's a redundancy. That means if you happen to sync something or there's any sort of conflict, you'll have 5 different versions of the file, so you can always go back to a different timestamp and then grab that one instead. And again, this is just another option if you want to make sure that you keep your precious save files and they don't get lost forever. Anyway, once you're done, you can click on that save button and we are done setting up our RetroArch save folder. Now let's do the same thing but with our save state folder. So we're going to go back and click on that add folder button. And now under our folder label, we're going to type in RA-states. Now under folder path, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to type in C, then colon, and then backslash. And then of course, we'll start typing in RetroArch. It's going to fill out the rest of the folder. We will do backslash again, and then type in the word states. And so now the file path is set up. Let's go over to the file versioning tab and then switch this over to simple file versioning and then save. We are now good. So let's take a quick pause and assess where we are right now. So what we've done so far is we set up SyncThing on our host PC, and we've also built out our save and save state folders and then sync them within SyncThing on this computer. Now the next thing we need to do is sync these folders with other folders on our handheld so that they can share all of their files. We've got 4 different ones to choose from, and it doesn't really matter which order we go in, so let's go with the top right, the Anbernic RG35XX-SP running MuOS. So here we are in the main MuOS menu. So we're going to navigate over into the configuration folder and then Wi-Fi network. And here I just want to make sure that I'm connected to my home network, which you can see that yes, I'm connected here. On the bottom right, you'll see that it says connected and then the IP address. You need to make note of this because you will use this later. And once you're connected to the home network, the next thing we want to do is go back into the configuration folder and then go into web services. And down here, you'll see an option for SyncThing and then change this from disabled to enabled. Once that's done, I do recommend rebooting your device just to make sure that everything is going to stick. So we'll go back to the main menu and then select reboot. And then once we're done, just give it a minute and wait for it to connect to the network. And now we're ready to actually start syncing. So we can set the device to the side and go back to our host PC where we're going to do all of our work. So now back on our web interface, on the bottom right, you can see there's an option that says Remote Devices. We're going to click on the button on the far right that says Add Remote Device. Now in the pop-up menu, you will see that there's going to be a nearby device listed by a string of numbers and letters. And this right here is our handheld, and so all we have to do at this point is just click on it. And that's going to populate the device ID so that we don't have to type this in ourselves. From there, we need to choose a device name, and you can name it whatever you would like, but I would recommend something memorable. What I like to do is type out the name of the operating system, then a dash, and then the name of the device. After that, you want to go into the second tab called Sharing, and there it's going to say whether or not you want to share any specific folders. And you guessed it, we want to share both of these folders with the device. So we're going to click on these and then click on Save. So at this point, the host PC is basically offering up a connection with the handheld and then saying also, we want you to connect to these 2 folders. And then on the bottom right, we will see the handheld. It's going to say disconnected because the handheld itself hasn't agreed to the connection yet. And so that's the next thing we're going to do. And in order to get to that, we need our IP address of the handheld. And so if you didn't make note of it before, here's another picture of the one on my device. Just bear in mind that the IP address is going to be different on my device than it is on yours. Anyway, once you have that IP address, we're going to open up a new tab on our web browser. And here we're going to type in that IP address just as we saw it before, but then also we need to add a colon and then the port number. And MuOS is a little bit different. Instead of using the standard 8384, which you will see in a lot of the other devices, the port on MuOS is 7070. So that's going to be our full address right here. The IP address that we had on our device, then a colon, and then the port 7070 for MuOS. From there, you can just press the enter button and you will see a very familiar interface because the web interface is going to be exactly the same on this machine too. Now this time we're going to get a bunch of banners up top, and a couple of those are going to be security related. Again, just ignore those. But you can see the one in the middle says new device, and then it says that a computer wants to connect. And so that's the option that we're going to focus on here. We're going to click on that button that says add device, and then we'll get another and very similar pop-up. Now this time it's going to pre-populate the device ID, and it's just got the name desktop and a couple other characters. And what I'm going to do here, just to make sure that I know what I'm connecting to, I'm going to change the name of this to the name of the actual PC. And I'm using the Minis Forum V3 right now, so that's the name I'm going to choose. This is all optional, but it just makes it a little bit easier to see. After that, I'm going to click on the Save button. And now at this point, the two devices are connected to each other, but the folders have not been synced just yet. In fact, after we're done, we're going to see two new banner pop-ups that are for new folders. And so we'll do the same thing here. We're going to add these new folders to our handheld. And let's start with the top one, which is for our RetroArch saves. We're going to click on the Add button again. And now the only thing we need to change is the folder path. We need to point to where our RetroArch saves are on MuOS on the RG35XXSP. And in my written guide, I have listed out all of the folder paths for all the operating systems, so you can always just consult that if you don't know where they're saved. And so I'm going to type out the address right here, and I'll also show it in big text here at the bottom. But essentially, we need to go to mnt/mmc/muos in all caps, then save/file. And again, it's pretty easy to type all this out because as you type it, it's going to show you the name of your folder options. And so once you're done, this is what it's going to look like. This is the location of your save files within MuOS. Once you have that folder path added, we can click on the Save button, and we are good to go with that one folder. Now let's do the same thing, but with the save states. We're going to click on that Add button again. And then once more, we need to add the folder path. This one's a little bit different, but pretty similar. We're going to type in mnt/mmc/muos/save/state. And that's the location of all of our save states. Now we can click on the Save button. After that, you're going to see a couple things. First, it's going to scan those folders on your device and see if there are any differences from the host PC. And there are quite a few differences because I have a bunch of saves on the handheld, but I have nothing on the host PC because I haven't actually ran any games yet. So what you'll see after it's done scanning down here on the bottom under remote devices, you'll see the computer and that it's syncing. What it's doing at this point is downloading all those new files from the handheld and then putting them on the host PC. So effectively, we are backing up all of our save games right now onto our computer. In fact, if we go back to our computer and then we go into that RetroArch folder, under saves, you will see that there are now a bunch of folders, and these are all the saves from our RG35XXSP. Same thing if we go into the states folder, you'll see a bunch of save states. These are all from our handheld as well. In fact, if I go into RetroArch on this PC and I go and I load up a game and that I know already has a save file for it, let's use Golden Sun as our example here on the Game Boy Advance because I have been playing this on the SP at least a little bit. And sure enough, when I open up this game, it's going to go directly into the main menu, and this only happens if you have a save file already. And sure enough, if we go into the Continue section, there's a save file right there. And so at this point, I have effectively backed up my save file from my handheld to my PC, and I can now play this game on my PC. In addition, if I continue to play on my PC and then I close it out, it's going to sync with the handheld as well. Just bear in mind that you'll have to be connected to the same network anytime you want to do a sync like this. But if theoretically we saved it on our PC and then went back to the handheld, we would now be able to start up that save game instead. Okay, so that's one handheld down. We are now ready to jump into our next one. I want to do the TrimUI Smart Pro next, and we're going to use CrossMix OS as our example. Now, initially when I first started making this guide, my plan was to use Newly, which is a fork of Batocera. And that's because Newly does support SyncThing. If we go into the system settings under services, you can see that SyncThing is here and we can turn it on. However, the thing about Newly, as well as Batocera, is that the way they save their games is a little bit different than all the other operating systems. So this OS will put your save files and your save states into folders that are dedicated to each console. And unfortunately, Batocera is quite locked down for a regular user. And so you do have to make quite a few changes under the hood if you wanted to change the way that Batocera actually saves its games. And personally, I think it's too much work if you're trying to save that between various different devices and various different operating systems. Instead, I would only recommend using SyncThing with Newly and Batocera if you're only going to be syncing them between other Newly or Batocera systems. Because if you keep it within those ecosystems, it's going to work out really well. In fact, there's a whole wiki page from the Batocera team on how to set this up. So unfortunately, even though I think it would be awesome to be able to sync between Newly and MuOS, it's a little bit too much work, and so we're not going to cover Newly in this video. However, I still want to cover the TrimUI Smart Pro, so we're going to go with another operating system that works on this handheld, which is CrossMix OS. And thankfully, this one also has SyncThing set up right out of the box. To get to this, we need to go into Apps, then System Tools, then Network. And within here, you will see a SyncThing option. It's going to be disabled by default, so all we have to do here is just select Enabled. And one of the nice things is as soon as you enable it, it's going to tell you your IP address right then and there. So if you're quick on the draw, you can make a note of it right then. Or if you ever need to find it later on, in the network section, there is an option that says Display IP. Now, before we jump in and sync the folders, there are a couple RetroArch tweaks that I would recommend just to make sure that everything is standardized with CrossMix OS. Here, we're going to go into Settings and then Saving, and you can see that by default there are two options turned on, which is to sort our saves and save states by content directory. And because we're trying to use a standard setup, we want to turn these two off. In addition, the autosave and autoload state parameters are a little bit different in CrossMix OS. And this is a very small change, but it has 20 maximum auto increments. We're going to change this down to 10. Again, this is really just to standardize everything. From there, I would recommend going into the main menu, then configuration file, and then save current configuration. And that's all we need to do. We just wanted to standardize our save files between these so that everything syncs nicely. So now that we have RetroArch configured correctly and SyncThing turned on, let's now go in and set this up. And you'll find that the process here is very similar to MooOS. On the bottom right, we're going to click on the thing that says Add Remote Device. From there, in the pop-up, you will see an option for our TrimUI Smart Pro. Click on that. That's going to fill in your device ID, and now we just need to add the device name. And again, we'll type in the name of the OS, then dash, and then device. So CrossMix-TrimUI Smart Pro. After that, go into the Sharing tab, and then click on the two folders that we want to share with our handheld. And that's it. We can now click on that Save button, and we're ready now to set up the handheld. So once again, we're going to open up a new tab, and now we're going to type in that IP address along with the port. And so I'm going to type in my IP address, then a colon, and then the port number, which is going to be 8384. And like I mentioned, the 8384 port is standard for basically everything but MooOS. Either way, once you have that typed in, go ahead and press enter, and you'll see something unique here. It's going to give you a login requirement. And this is unique to the TrimUI Smart Pro SyncThing app. Thankfully, it's pretty easy. So the username is going to be TrimUI, and then the password is going to be TrimUI Sync. What I would recommend at this point is click on that checkbox that says Stay Logged In. That way you won't have to type in the credentials in the future. Anyway, once you've now logged in, you will see a very familiar web UI, and you'll also see a banner notification that says that a computer is trying to connect with you. And so at this point, I bet you can guess what we're going to do. We're going to click on Add Device, and now if you want, you can add the name of your computer, which I'm going to do here, Minis Forum V3. And then, once we've added the computer, we'll get these second banner prompts, which will ask us to add our folders. Again, this is exactly like how it was on MooOS. Now we'll click on the Add button, and then down below, we will see there's a folder path. In fact, SyncThing pre-populates this for you because they just guess at where they are, but this is not, as far as I can tell, where they're actually saving the saves. It looks like at some point they had planned on putting them there, but this isn't actually where RetroArch is putting them. So the actual path is going to be mnt/sdcard/RetroArch, and then it'll be .RetroArch. Within there, you will find our saves and states folders. And so this is what the path will look like once you have it typed out, and again, I will have all these listed in the written guide. And from there, we are good to go. We can click on the Save button, and now it will sync with our host PC. And because the host PC has all those files we pulled from the other device, that means it's going to sync with the other device as well. So now let's go ahead and do the same thing, but with the Save States folder. Same thing here, we'll click on the Add button, and then under Folder Path, we're going to go to the SD card retroarch.retroarch/states. And then the process will happen all over again. It's going to scan all of the files within your device and then sync it with the host PC. And that's really it. We have now set up the TrimUI Smart Pro. So now let's test it to see that everything has been synced. This time around, I'm going to try a different game, Pokemon Fire Red. And that's because I never played this on the TrimUI Smart Pro, but I lent my SP to a friend who played this game for a few hours when I was on travel. And because we synced the SP with our host PC, that means that those files have now been synced with the TrimUI Smart Pro as well. And sure enough, when I start up this game, you can see that my friend's save file is right here. He put in 3 hours and 26 minutes. And so there we go. I'm now accessing a save file that was actually saved on another device initially. Let's do one more test, but this time with Golden Sun. Now, the last time that I opened this game was on the host PC. If you remember, I checked to make sure the save file was there, but one of the things that I did is I moved to a different location and then saved the game. And that's because Golden Sun is really handy in that it'll save exactly where your character is positioned. So considering the fact that this is the most recent save file across all of my devices, let's go ahead and open up the TrimUI Smart Pro with the same game. And sure enough, when I open up this game, my character is exactly where he was standing when I saved it on my computer a few minutes ago. And so there we go. We now have two handhelds that are syncing with my host PC, and all of these files are being shared with one another. So now let's set up one more Linux-based device. We're going to do the Powkiddy RGB30. This one is running Rocknix, which previously was known as Jealous, and so this process will work for both of these two operating systems. And thankfully, SyncThing has been on these devices for quite some time, so it's a pretty simple setup. First, make sure that you're connected to your home network, and then go down into Cloud Services, and there's an Enable SyncThing option. And go ahead and turn this on. From there, I would recommend backing out and going into the System Settings menu. Under the Authentication section, you will see an option to rotate your root password, and it's going to give you this really long and complex password. I personally don't think this device needs that much security, so I'm going to turn off that rotate root password, and then I've added my own root password right here, which I am just making something very easy, which is the word root. And that's because we're going to need to log into this device, so we want to make this as easy as possible. After we've done that, we do need to make a couple changes in RetroArch because the way that Rocknix saves its files is a little bit different. In fact, all the save games are going to be with the ROM directory, so we need to change that out if we are going to be using SyncThing. So go into the Tools section and then start up RetroArch. I would recommend the 64-bit one, but it actually doesn't really matter. Once you're in RetroArch, go into Settings and then go into Saving. And I've already made a couple changes from the default, so I'm just going to show you the ideal setup. First thing is make sure that the top option is selected, the one that says Sort Saves into Folders by Core Name. Turn this on. But you will see that the bottom section is just blanked out. You're not able to change the directory of the save states. And that's because Rocknix uses a special configuration of where the save states are, which are actually going to be in its own folder. And so unfortunately, I wasn't able to figure out how to get save states synced with SyncThing. Instead, we're just going to focus on save games only, at least with this OS. Another thing you need to make sure is turned off is the option that says Write Saves to Content Directory. This one needs to be turned off so that the save files will now be saved into the RetroArch folder instead. Just note that this isn't going to move over your save files over from the ROM's directory. You'll have to move them manually, and I have instructions for that in the written guide. And again, like I mentioned, the more handhelds and operating systems that you include within SyncThing, it gets more and more complicated. Either way, those are the only main changes that you need to do. Because we're not going to be messing with save states at all, we don't have to worry about autosave and autoload. After that, we can go back to the main menu, configuration file, save current configuration, and then quit out of RetroArch. At this point, I would recommend restarting your machine just to make sure that everything's stuck. And once you've rebooted back into Rocknix, then you want to go into the network settings and then make note of your IP address. And now we're finally ready to pair this device with our SyncThing setup. And so back on the web UI for our host PC, we need to go down to the Add Remote Device button. And again, this will all be very straightforward. You'll click on the device ID, which will pre-populate it. And then under device name, we want to type in the OS, which is Rocknix, and then the device, which is RGB30. From there, click on your Sharing tab, and then click on your Save folder. You don't actually need to sync your save states since we're not actually doing that, but I accidentally forgot, and so I did click on that. Either way, this is a good opportunity to show you how to unsync a folder later. Let's go ahead and click on that Save button, and now we need to open up the UI for our RGB30. We're going to open up a new tab in our browser and then type in the IP address that we saw on our device just a second ago. From there, we want to add colon and then the port 8384. And once you press enter, it's going to ask you for a username and password. And the username by default is going to be root. And if you remember, we changed the password to be root as well, just to make it very simple. And so once I've typed those two, you can click on the login button. And sure enough, first thing we'll see is a pop-up banner up top that will say that a device is trying to connect with this handheld. We're going to click on Add Device and then change the device name to the name of our computer, which is Minisforum V3. And that's it. We can click on Save, and then after a moment, you're going to get a pop-up here saying that it also wants to sync folders with you. So let's sync it up with our RetroArch Saves folder. We're going to click on that Add button, and now under Folder Path, we need to add the location of all of our RetroArch saves. And you'll find them under storage/.config/retroarch/saves. And so now we can click on the Save button, and it's going to start to sync all of the folders between the host PC, which had all of the save files from the other handhelds, and then also the RGB30. However, like I mentioned before, we can't actually sync our save states, and so we need to remove this folder. First thing I'm going to do on my RGB30 tab is I'm going to click the Ignore button so we don't see this prompt again. And then back on our host PC, I'm going to go down to Remote Devices and click on my RGB30. From there, I'm going to click on the Edit button, and you will see that the RA states is listed. And what I'll do here is I'll uncheck it, so that way it's no longer going to offer sharing that folder. And that's it. We are now done with the RGB30 in terms of setting up the folders. It's a lot easier because we only have the save games here. Now let's go ahead and test to make sure that everything is working. So we're going to go back onto our RGB30 and then try to open up Golden Sun. And sure enough, when I start it up, I have the option to start up a save game. And once I open that up, you can see it's exactly where I was the last time I saved this game. So it looks like everything is syncing nicely with the RGB30 as well. Okay, we are now 3/4 the way done. We have saved the best for last. That's going to be Android, which I think is probably the easiest one to set up because most of it is going to be pretty automated. We're going to use my Retroid Pocket 4 Pro as the example, but this can be done with any device. So no matter what, as long as it's running Android and running the Android version of RetroArch, you should be good to go. Now, adding SyncThing to an Android device is very easy because SyncThing is available within the Google Play Store. The app that I recommend is called SyncThing Fork, and that's because the official one for some reason is no longer on the Play Store, but this fork works just fine. And it's totally free to install, and once you have it installed, let's go ahead and open it up. And depending on the Android version, you might get a prompt like this asking you to allow permission to file access. And go ahead and click continue here and you'll be greeted with the introductory page of SyncThing for Android. Here, just click through and then grant file access permissions as it asks for it. It's also going to ask for special permissions with battery optimization as well because this device has to run in the background. Once you add those two permissions, you'll be greeted with the main SyncThing fork screen. And now we're ready to pair this with our host PC. So we're going to go back to the computer and then go onto our web UI. And the setup here is going to be almost identical. We're going to click on the add remote device on the bottom right, and then we will see our device ID of the Android device right here. So we'll click on that. Under device name, again, I'm going to name the operating system and the device. So Android-RP4 Pro. Now, under the Sharing tab, I'm going to click on the two folders that I want to share, which are RA Save and RA States. And then we can just click on the Save button and we're ready to go back to our handheld. Now, SyncThing will also prompt you to connect to your new computer and folder, but it's not going to be a pop-up menu. Instead, it's going to be a standard Android notification. So you want to swipe down from the top, and then within your notifications menu, you should see that the desktop is trying to connect. Here, click on the little arrow on the right, and it's going to give you an option to either accept or ignore. We're going to click accept. And really, at that point, you don't have to do anything else. You could rename the computer if you would like. We're just going to tap on create. Now, after that's been done, we will get new prompts, but this time for the folders. So again, we will swipe down from the top, and we will have two new notifications. Let's start with the save games first. We're going to tap on that arrow on the right. From there, we can open up the notification. It's going to ask us to accept or ignore. We're going to accept. Now this time you need to identify your RetroArch save game directory. So tap on the directory option and then open up that hamburger menu on the top left to bring up your device. Once you're in the root directory of your device, you can go into the RetroArch folder and there will be your saves folder. Just tap on that and then select use this folder. It's going to ask, do you really want to allow it? And you're going to say, yeah, man, I want to allow it. And that's it. You don't really have to change any of the other settings. You can just tap on create and we are good to go. It'll take a minute to scan through and sync everything, but then it'll be all connected. Let's now do the same thing, but with the save state. So we're going to swipe down from the top again, and there's our notification to save our save states folder. And it's going to be the exact same process. We'll open up that notification and then select accept. That's going to bring up this menu again, and now we need to tie it to the correct directory. So we're going to tap on that folder icon, then bring up the hamburger menu, go back to the root directory of our device. From there, we'll open up the RetroArch folder and then the states folder. And then finally, we will tap on use this folder and then allow it to access these files, and we are now good to go. At this point, this device is now going to sync just like with all the others. However, one thing to bear in mind, with Android devices, SyncThing is just going to run in the background, and that can drain your battery pretty quickly. So here are some tips to help you save on battery life. Within SyncThing, we're going to open up that hamburger menu, then go into Settings. Now under SyncThing options, we have two configurations we want to turn off. And that's going to be Global Discovery and Enable Relaying. Because we're using a home network, we're not going to need these options at all. Additionally, going back to the main settings menu, we want to go into Run Conditions. And there near the bottom, there's going to be an option that says Run According to Time Cycle. If you turn this on, that means that every hour for 5 minutes, it's going to sync with your device. And so it's not going to happen constantly. And this is going to save you a lot of battery life. However, just bear in mind that it's not quite as convenient as having instant syncing. So what I would recommend is if you plan on jumping into a game or you just finished out a game and you want to force a sync, that's also very easy. If you go back into the main menu, under SyncThing Fork at the top left, you will see that it's either going to be orange or green. And if it's orange, that means it is not syncing, it's in standby. And so to force a sync, you want to go into the Status tab, and then there's a middle option that says Force Start, Ignore Run Conditions. If you tap on that, it's going to automatically connect and sync with your host PC. And so this is the easiest way to force a sync if you don't want to wait for a whole hour. And then once everything is up to date, you can go back into that Status tab and then tap on the button that says Follow Run Conditions. This will put it back into standby, and then it'll connect once an hour from there. Now, before you start jumping into games, I would recommend going into RetroArch on your device and making sure that all of your saves are properly configured. So under the Savings tab, make sure that your top two options are turned on. And then if you're going to be using auto saves and auto loads, turn those on, and then also the increment save states and then 10 increments. Once you have all that set up, we are now ready to test this out. Let's go through Game Boy Advance and then start up a game. I'm just going to close my eyes and pick a random game here. Let's see what it is. Oh, and look at that. It's actually Golden Sun. So let's test and see where this one's saved. And sure enough, when we start up the game, we are in that exact position the last time that we saved this game. So everything is working hunky-dory. Let's do the same thing with Pokemon Fire Red, again remembering that my friend has his save game on here. And sure enough, as soon as I started it up, it actually auto-loaded a save state that I had from a previous device, and here we are exactly where we were before. So there we go, we now have Android set up along with 3 other handhelds and of course our host PC. Now for our last section, we're going to talk about setting this up without a host PC in the first place. As we have it set up right now, my Windows PC is home base, so all of my different handhelds are connecting to that and then syncing our files that way. But let's say that you wanted to connect directly from the RG35XX over to the TrimUI Smart Pro without the middleman. And so now I'm going to show you how to connect these directly instead. I'm not really sure how often you will want to sync from one device to the other, but it's always nice to know how to do it. So first thing we need to do is make sure our devices are turned on with SyncThing enabled and all that. And then on our computer, we're going to open up new tabs and connect to the web interfaces for each of our devices respectively. So first I'll connect to the RG35XX running MooOS. Again, I'm just going to type in the IP address, then the port, and then press enter. We're going to do the same thing with the TrimUI Smart Pro. Again, typing in the IP address, then the port, and then enter. So now I've got both tabs open for each device. Now we're going to pick one of our two devices. We'll start with the RG35XX. And now under remote devices, you will see it already has my host PC right there. But at this point, we want to add the TrimUI Smart Pro as well. So we're going to tap on Add a Remote Device, and then under Device ID, we will see the TrimUI Smart Pro, so we're going to click on that. And then under Device Name, we can type whatever we want, but I'm going to stick to our standard, so it's going to be CrossMix-TSP. From there, go into the Sharing tab and then click our two folders that we're already syncing. After that, tap on the Save button, and now we need to accept this configuration on the TrimUI Smart Pro. So we're going to go into that tab, we'll get a banner prompt, we're going to click on Add. From there, you can add the device name. I forgot to, I just clicked the Save button. It doesn't really matter. And after you've connected these two devices, it's going to ask, hey, do you want to share these folders with this device as well? And thankfully, this is super simple. You just have to click on the Share button, and that's it. It's going to automatically save it. And that's because we're all syncing the same folder, and it's kind of figured it out at this point. And so there we are. We have now connected each of these devices to one another as well as the host PC. So now anytime a save gets updated on any of these three devices, they will sync with one another instead of just the host PC. This will be great, for example, if you have your PC turned off, but you want to jump from one handheld to another. And with that, we are actually done setting up SyncThing on these devices. Now there's an entire rabbit hole when it comes to setting up this app, and we didn't even touch some of the other things you could do. For example, you could sync up other standalone emulators, or you can even sync up your ROM directories if you wanted to. In addition, there are other handhelds that support SyncThing, including like the Miyoo Mini Plus as well as the Steam Deck. However, those configurations are a lot more complicated, so I'm going to explain all of that in a written guide instead. Either way, I hope that you enjoyed going through this guide and that it was helpful for you. There are quite a few caveats when it comes to setting up syncing, just because it can get pretty complicated, especially with save states. But I think once you have it working, it can be really beneficial, especially if you're trying to continue a game between multiple platforms. So let me know if you have any questions in the comments down below, and be sure to check out that written guide. I'm going to keep updating it. As always, thank you for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.